Alright, so I didn't do a launch this time, but hello everybody and welcome to Digression from the Theme. So this week, if anybody watched last week, you know that I was pretty sensitive about Rings of Power. And I gave it a few defensive points, right? I was talking about it and I wasn't overly critical. I said they did a couple things right and there were a couple things that I was very glad they did the way they did. All of those points have gone out the window. But before I get into my big spiel about it, I wanted to hear your opinion of it, sort of relatively unbiased by my opinion here. So I'm gonna let you go first because, as you can probably tell, while I fix that. Beep beep. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The Harfoots. No, they call them Harfoots. Yeah. Yeah. They don't trust any of the big folk. Right. Yeah, it happens so quick. It's all in one episode. They threw it in there just to push your expectations aside. But I do think that the twist with I can't remember the human guy's name. I think it's Hilbrant, or Hellbrant or something like that. So the thing is that and for anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about, it turns out that Galadriel's companion, big spoiler alerts here, is Sauron. Oh my goodness. Yeah, which I don't like. I don't know if Sauron was known by many names. Yeah, and death. The devil and death. And well, but Sauron isn't even the devil in Lord of the Rings. He's the devil's henchman. And then when the devil's gone, he fills in. He's like Crowley. He's not even like an important figure. He's a little freaking water boy who was tailing around Lucifer, and then when Lucifer was gone, he's like, well, I mean, I could do that. And acts like he's super big, bad, tough guy. But okay, so go ahead. I did. Yes. Right. Oh, it's right where okay, so right when they're about to attack, the bad guy gets out and runs to the old dude, the old like traitor human. And he says, "Hey, I need you to do something." Right there. Right there. He hands the old guy the actual thing, takes an axe, and then runs away on the horse. And so the old guy creeps away. So yes. Yeah, well, it does happen with him. I think it happens twice, but it doesn't really give you the full view of it, right? Because it's not meant to be a weapon, really. It's a key. So it's really meant that you summon the sword and then you unlock the door. It's not meant to be you summon the sword and then you fight with it. So I think the kid uses it once, where he like calls on it in a room and there's an orc, but then the orc just like beats him up anyway because he doesn't know how to fight. So all right, here's the thing. The twist with Hilbrant would have performed 1,000 times better without the Gandalf Sauron misdirect. You didn't need it. It was completely unnecessary. Me too, because one, it's if you know the lore, the twist works better. Because the second twist does, where you find out that it is Gandalf. Because Gandalf's not supposed to be there for another, like, 1,300 years. There is a long period of time. Gandalf was not there for the last war of elves and men. No, he was not, because when they show up, it is there to answer the further threat of the rings after Sauron's gone. They were meant to help guide humanity so that Sauron couldn't come back, because they knew that the ring wasn't destroyed. And the other rings still existed and were still corrupting people, and that's why they sent, Saruman with the ring lore, and they sent Gandalf with his teachings, and they sent the one who loves nature. But before them, and this is what I thought they might have been going for, because canonically this would have worked, is if this guy was one of the 2 blue wizards. No, there's 2. There are 5 total wizards in the council. And so there's white, there's gray, there's brown, and there's the 2 blueses. That's how Gandalf refers to them. And nobody really remembers their names, although their names are in Unfinished Tales. I can't tell you them off the top of my head. There's a lot of names in Unfinished Tales. But they were sent to try and stop Sauron in the first place. And they failed. Now, see, this is the thing I was mentioning, is that when those 3 wraiths, essentially, that told Gandalf that he was Sauron, when they were like, we're going to go east to Rhûn, it's like, all right, well, that's where the 2 blues went. They went east and never came back. And it's unclear whether they were corrupted by Sauron, or whether they were just corrupted, or whether they got bored like Radagast and fell in love with nature. It could have been any number of things, but it was like, these 2 dudes together that were on this adventure, and they came a long time before the rest, and then when the other wizards show up, I think they're already gone. But they were like a group of 5 before any of them went, was the point. And then 2 went, and then the other 3 would come. So the fact that Gandalf shows up so early means that if you know any of the lore, and you know when he's supposed to show up, you're not going to expect that. You don't expect him to divert that heavily. And so, like, I had seen something talking about the... Go ahead. You're fine. No problem. The dog. You're alright, no worries. I assume that was the dog. Yeah, no problem. People understand. Right. And so since like I know what or when Gandalf was supposed to show up, that means that I'm not going to expect them to swap that around so hard. And then at the same time, there's these other tidbits of it, which are like, I gave them, oh geez, sorry, 1 second. I had a screen pop up. So the other part of it is I read some like interview with the showrunner that was saying, oh, here is why I diverted so heavily from the lore. And I was like, well, he's probably referencing something with Gandalf. And then I gave benefit of the doubt, saying maybe that's not it. When they dropped the Sauron thing, I was like, okay, well, I saw that coming with this information that I have as a fan of the lore, meaning that it's not Gandalf, so who else has this kind of power? It's either one of the Blue Wizards or it's Sauron. But then they flip back on it, and it is Gandalf. And it's like, why? Why did you have to do that? You didn't have to do that. And, yeah, at any rate, that was one of my big problems with it. But aside from that, just in general, the whole thing with Hilbrand being Saruman is problematic. I think it was executed okay, but it's also a big diversion from the lore. Now, it is closer than I thought they were going to go, right? Because I had mentioned that Sauron was in the island country, right? That he was there. Oh my gosh, I can't remember. I always forget. It's not Arnor, that's north. Wherever the human place is. My brain's a little fuzzy tonight. But the whole human capital place. That's where Sauron is supposed to be at this point. He's supposed to convince their king to march on the west, the homeland of the Valar or whatever, and then God comes in and is like, no, and then sinks the island. And it's in sinking the island that the people who were still loyal to the elves and the old ways, which was people like Elendil and Isildur, all the humans, that's when they go and they build Gondor. So, but the island hasn't sunk. And yet, it seems like they're leaning towards, all right, well, so it seems like they might go there, right? That now you're going to have that divide in that country because the queen has come back blind, and now there's this big statue. The politics there have changed. So there, it seems like they're heading in the right direction. But that was not spurred by Sauron. That was spurred by Galadriel. Sauron was there being like, no, I don't want to do this. I want to sit here. And it seems like if he had just sat there, then it could have been lore accurate. But he also wasn't really there as a prisoner. Like, he was, but because he beat some dude up in the street, not because they know that he's Sauron, which is canonically the point, is that they found Sauron still alive and were like, no, you're going in a jail cell. And then over like 100 years, he convinced the king, became the advisor to the king, and then caused a war that made the island sink. And then Sauron shows up. And so in that is where the elves are convinced that he's dead. Because it's like the elves are like, well, we just don't know where he went, right? And then he shows up there. And then the island sinks in a massive tidal wave. And so the elves are like, well, he's dead. So then when he shows up as this mysterious figure talking about rings and how to forge these rings of power, that's when Celebrimbor is like, oh, okay, and doesn't have an inkling of being suspicious of him. But that information coming from a human who just sort of worked as a smith's apprentice for a little while is very questionable. Also, Celebrimbor, you are the greatest smith in like Elvendom. You didn't think about making an alloy? You didn't think of that? That's idiotic. Also, it seems like, I know they're in a hurry, but at the same time, why would you immediately try to, like, pressure crunch metal together instead of trying to mix it in a pot? It's like, we built this crucible to try and push the metal together, but it resists. It's like, but then you melt it gently in a pot and that works? You didn't try that first. Instead, you built a huge pressure crucible. That's an interesting choice for the greatest smith in the world. And the fact that these little nuggets of information are coming from this rando human who, just so happens to, at the same time, like, be discovered as having this knowledge and just being Sauron. There's a bunch of problems with this. And I'm pretty sure that Celebrimbor was supposed to have a hand in making all of the rings. Not just the elven rings. No, the elven rings were the last ones made. Yeah. So I think the One Ring did come after the elven rings, but they were made in secret, like after the forging of the 7 and the 9. So canonically, there's a lot of diversions here, and it ends up being a little strange, a little convoluted, and also, are there no elves watching the gates for the King of Men to just go walking away. They don't have any guards who would be like, oh yeah, Hilbrand just like went out on his horse an hour ago. Huh. Instead it's like, oh no, he drops Galadriel in a river and she passes out and has some weird nightmare, and then he's just gone. And I get it, he can like shapeshift and stuff, so okay, whatever, that's fine, but just in general, it felt like, you know, they built him up as this big bad threat, and at no point in season 1 did he ever command an orc or fight a good guy. He made some vague threats against Galadriel and tried to swing her onto his side. Like, I disagreed with the "we could rule together" bit. I was like, no, you can't. What do you think this is? Literally, you command an army of corrupted versions of her, essentially. Because the orcs were elves. I think Sauron has a problem with elves. So, you know, it ended up being a very strange experience watching through it, where it was like, I was like, okay, I can watch it. It's an okay show. And then I was like, all right, this is a little bit of a problem, but it's defensible. And then I got to the like second last episode, and I was like, okay, I think they're going in a good direction. And then the last episode, they just set your balls on fire and kick you out a window. So, yeah, I'm not frustrated. I didn't expect much out of it. But it's one of those things, it's like, it is possible to tell a non-canonical but still very interesting story with the Lord of the Rings property, right? I'll give you an example. There is a video game that tells an infinitely better story than Rings of Power, and is non-canonical. It should poke holes in Lord of the Rings so big that you can't patch them, but it doesn't, really. And that is the game Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War. It's 2 games. And what the first one is about, interestingly enough, is you play as a human ranger who works on the Black Wall outside of Mordor during the times of peace, right? But you're there when Sauron comes to power again in the Third Age. Or you're there in the build-up to it. So, like, the ring has already been lost by Gollum. So Bilbo has the ring at this point. You're in that 60-year period, right? But you get killed by some of Sauron's henchmen that have showed up or whatever. And they kill your family, and then they kill you. But your soul ends up tied to the soul of Celebrimbor. And you spend the whole game trying to get vengeance for your family. And by the end of the game, you've forged your own ring of power. Like a second version of the One Ring. But it's the One Ring that hasn't been tainted yet. You use Celebrimbor's soul to make the ring. And it allows you to command orcs. So, you know, it's a game story, so a lot of it is in service of the gameplay, right? So now you can get an army of orcs, and you can fight other orcs with them. But at the same time, the story is pretty well told. At the beginning of the second game, you end up losing the Ring of Power to Shelob, who for some reason they made a woman in that game. Like, it is still the spider, but she can turn into a woman. And she uses the ring to, like, see the future, and ends up getting, like, beaten up by the ring wraiths. For the ring, and so she gives it back to you. But, you know, in the whole of the game, you know, building a new Ring of Power in the 60 years should be hugely problematic. But by the end of the game, I'm pretty sure you end up becoming like a ring wraith instead, in order to stop Celebrimbor, who betrays you. He ends up working with an elf to try and become the new Sauron, essentially, because it's like violence is the only answer. We can't do this subtly. And so you take on, like, ring wraith power in order to stop them, and by the end of it, I'm pretty sure the ring is destroyed. So it doesn't cause any ripples. This is just a little thing that happened, essentially. Celebrimbor's gone now, but it doesn't poke huge holes in the story. The Rings of Power has such ripples. Like, for one, the stranger couldn't have been Sauron, right? Because Sauron was unaware of hobbits. So, but at the same time, they're already breaking lore, so why couldn't he have seen the hobbits and just, ruin that one line that Gandalf says about Sauron being unaware of hobbits until now? It makes it very hard to predict where they're going to go, and I'm like, okay, you don't want your story to be predictable, but why use the IP if you're not going to actually adapt it? Like, if you're just going to take bits and pieces that we know and change them. It's different than telling around them, which is what you should do. You should improve the whole by telling a story that we don't know. But instead, they rip out chunks that we do know and then smash them together and warp them until we don't recognize them. And then they regurgitate them back at us. And it's like, but we liked the story as it was. The Silmarillion might be hard to read, but it has its fans. But I think I've spieled long enough about Rings of Power. Yeah. Anything going on in politics? Really? Yeah. Oh. You get a mutiny immediately. Yeah. Well, no, but it's a pretty good example. I mean, it does, control a fair amount of our lives and deaths, so. Yeah. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Oh, yeah, but they're not going to. They're definitely not going to. Yep. Unfortunately. Yeah. 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 Oh, yeah. Was it only that much? I thought they got fined a whopping amount, like to the tunes of billions. Well, I mean, and for sake of that, he did just lose an outrageous amount of money because of Meta being a terrible, terrible investment. For him, yeah. Yeah. It's ether dollars. Well, even cash is pretty much that. The piece of paper that says you own a very small percentage. Yeah. 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 Oh, yeah. You know what? No, but it's like Facebook bought, I think they bought Oculus, right? So they bought a VR technology and were like, "Hey, this is cool. How can we sell it?" It's like you bought a gaming platform and you're trying to sell it as the Matrix. For real? And not like a good version of the Matrix, like, "Ooh, look at these high fidelity graphics. You won't even know you're in a game." It's like, "Hey, look, we made emoji people. Look at all the emoji people." No, it doesn't. I don't know how you can spend that much money and get so little result when you have companies like, okay, like Boneworks, which is a game that has an incredible physics engine. It's on VR. The graphics are good. And it's like, okay, they probably had to the tune of some millions of dollars. Facebook is throwing billions at this and are getting like memes. They're getting memes out of it. Oh, we have the technology 100%, but the thing is, a lot of it's proprietary. Uh, Maybe. But at this point, I don't even think that's proprietary anymore. I think he probably has sold it already because other things are already showing they can do it. But aside from that, right, just the technology of VR has some really impressive things, right? There are games that you give them the dimensions of your room, and they will change the dimensions of the game room to match them. So, taking the graphics and taking procedural generation, right? And then taking even just a little bit of the tech that, just the idea of the tech that James Cameron used, because we use stuff sort of like that. Our facial recognition software on phones that takes your face and it makes it into like a meme. You can tune that up. All it's doing is making a bone outline of your face, and then it's projecting something over it, right? And the number of polygons you put into that projection determines the quality and fidelity of the image. With the amount of money they have, right? I'm going to use an example here, World of Warcraft or any other MMO that is capable of hosting thousands upon thousands of people in the same space with their models doing different animated things. When you put off the yield of a lot of this stuff onto the user, and you're only hosting server information, right? So any graphical information is hosted essentially by the computer, but any interactive information is hosted by the server. Then you take a lot of the load off, so you don't have to worry about hosting this giant server farm in order to run these things. And then, but like you have games like Fortnite, which are hosting concerts, and it's like, I don't want to sit in a concert on a controller game. What is that? That's not live. I'm watching a recording. I'll just watch a YouTube video of a concert. But there are other animated avatars there, so you feel like you're with people. Just mix that a little bit with VR. Just host a concert in VR. You could do it. It wouldn't be that complicated. And we know Facebook has the servers. Or if not Facebook, Bezos. Why don't you do it? There's money there. And Amazon has its own web hosting service that, granted is very expensive, but they own it. And yeah. Well, they also, their web hosting service, I got hacked by someone on their web hosting service. Somebody hacked me to the tune of $2,000. I told you about this. Where they were essentially shipping data on the blockchain. And I got my money back, but because I have an Amazon business account that's connected to the web hosting services, because I wanted to try their text-to-speech program, which is not very good. It's very expensive if you want the good one. You pay per word, and it's several cents per word. So, but at any rate, we know that server capacity is out there. We know that the programming language is out there. The VR technology is out there. The 3D rendering technology is out there. All you have to do is put money in the right corners, and you could make Meta a thing to be remembered. But Zuckerberg doesn't know any of this. His team doesn't know any of this. Funny enough, the gaming scene is actually where you would find the people who would know how to do this stuff. Or at least know how to compile the pieces. It's not even about knowing how to do VR tech. It's about knowing the pieces that you would need. Now, I'm not claiming to be an expert in VR, but I have written code for video games. I've done some programming. And I've played a lot of video games, and I know the technology that's out there in bits and pieces. And I know it's not as easy as gluing it together. But given the amount of money at stake here, it's possible to make something a lot more like the Matrix than we're getting. Because what we're getting is VR Chat 2.0, which is a meme. VR Chat is a meme. It's a joke. And that's all we're getting, to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. It's absolutely insane. A lot of this stuff I can't understand from the ground up. It's like, I do understand that there's a point at which you have made so much money that the value of $1 is non-existent. Right? It's as the same way that we can't, as normal people, fathom what it would feel like to have several $1 trillion. It's a number we really can't wrap our head around. People with Yeah. Sorry, we're dropping an insane number of frames here. Alright, like to the tune of 64%. And I just had a disconnect and a reconnect. Or you froze for a minute. I'm not sure what's going on. It's not the biggest deal. I just wanted to let you know that it was going on. Yeah, I'm not sure why. Like, it's only using 1% of my CPU. But, just dropping massive frames. It's probably on my end as far as the internet goes, I would imagine. Because I'm only getting 10 megs a second upload. Oh, okay. Hold on, I just jumped. I'm back in the green. I was in red upload there for a minute. Yeah, mine's not doing very good either at the moment, but my dropped frames have gone down. I'm not dropping any frames anymore. So just an internet blip there. Um, yeah, especially out here. But it's just the world has become a very confusing place. It's hard to wrap my head around all of what's going on in the world, and there are too many things to worry about. So it becomes very difficult to know where to put your attention. You know, any given minute I could be, okay, the power grid is going to crash sometime in the next 10 years. Or, really? For granted. Yeah, well, and the oil that we do have in reserve that we're pushing out, we're gonna run out of the reserves that we need that we can refine. Because we're capable of refining medium. I think it's medium sour crude instead of light sweet crude. Europe is the one that does light sweet. And light sweet is the one that's coming from the places that aren't sanctioned. A lot of the medium sour comes from Russia. Yeah. Yeah, they're doing it. It's just we can't refine the oil that they're using. Yeah. Yep. And yeah. Well, and Russia is responsible for I think it's 8% of the total oil that we use, but it's a larger percent of that specifically of the oil that we can refine. So because we take in oil that we have to have refined too, which is more expensive to dole out because we have to ship it somewhere to get it refined. But I'm not sure what the percentages are off the top of my head of what percentage of medium sour they provided. But that's, with that being gone, it makes a difference. Yeah. Yeah. And people treat it that way, like they treat everything else as being in a vacuum, and nothing's in a vacuum. And now I'm certainly not an expert. This is all based on research that I've done, but research is never complete by the nature of being research. And I welcome any dissenting opinions as far as that goes, because I always like to learn. So, but when you're halfway, I would say when you're halfway through looking into something is when you tend to be the most afraid, because you don't understand enough to know whether or not it is a threat, or whether it's something that's a little bit overblown. And then when you get to the end and you understand a lot, it either feels inevitable or it doesn't feel like a threat. It's one way or the other. It's easier to fear things that you're not sure if they can be fixed. Then if you know it can't be fixed, then it's like, well, we tried. You can give up at that point. But, I can't do enough research on the internet because there aren't enough trustworthy sources that I can track down, source, and find out where they're getting their information or whether it's reliable. Yeah. Right. Okay. Shadow band. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but there's a difference between throttling and censoring, though, and it seems like they've blurred the lines to a fog that covers everything. Yeah. Yeah. But not with the collusion of the government. Yeah. To censor and propagandize social media. Yeah. Yeah. Defense. Yeah. It's multiplicative. It's, you know. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're just gonna put a gag on you and gun mufflers on everybody else. Yeah. Oh, they kowtow. 100%. Oh yeah, well they struck that. It's do no evil, or don't be evil, and they struck that from their official policy. Yeah. 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 Exactly. Advertisers and foreign governments. Oh, of course. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we've hit our hour. So yeah, I like. the fjord of the Schwings. Schwing. So, yeah, but to anybody who decided to listen, I apologize for any internet issues that we had during the podcast. I mean, it seems like it's run up there a few times where it's dropped frames for a little while. Right now, we're not missing any, so I figured I would explain that here at the end. If you stuck through, I appreciate it. I'll put uncertainty on the next week or two. We're going to try, but yeah, but we'd probably yeah, either way, but I mean we don't have to stick to a strict time schedule. It's not that important, so yeah, and I have, as long as I have free time in that period. So but generally I do. So we'll try. But once again, thank you everyone for coming and listening to us babble about stuff that is completely unrelated. We didn't have that many diversions today, though, so today was relatively sticky. Yeah. Yeah, the desire was there, but we didn't score a lot of points today. So, but at any rate, I hope you all have. Well, eventually, yes. Yeah, I'll get into setting that up. It's not that complicated, but just I hope everybody has a good night, and